Hello again, friends. Time for the first official podcast slash flash quiz of the semester. And boy, oh boy, is this a couple of events that are going to have very significant impacts to their regions, but also to the world and the foreign policy of all the major power players, including your United States of America. So the deal is that there is a referendum for independence occurring in two different places within 7 days of each other, in Catalonia and in Kurdistan. And these are places that most of you have never even heard of. They're not even worthy enough to have made the American news cycle to be reported on, but trust me, the repercussions of this stuff have way bigger long-term consequences than any of the Trump tweet storms that are occurring, or the battle of the goobers between North Korea and the United States, and the throwing out of threats and words. That's what catches all the press. This stuff actually is way more important, so let's talk about it. Independence referendums in Catalonia and Kurdistan causing chaos. Now, here's the deal. When we're talking about a referendum, all right, we're talking about a vote that is happening from the people themselves, not necessarily sanctioned by the governments of the sovereign states that they are currently contained in. You already know from this course what nations are versus states, and of course nation states. So what we're talking about is nations of people who have taken it upon themselves, who have said, we have a distinct culture, a distinct history, a distinct whatever, and we're currently located in a sovereign state, and we may perhaps want to rule ourselves, and we're going to vote. We're just going to get together and have a vote to see if enough of us want to declare independence. In the case of both Catalonia and Kurdistan, these are votes that are not sanctioned nor supported by the sovereign states that these entities, these peoples are located in. So in the case of Catalonia, only the Spanish government mostly is upset that these folks might be having a vote to declare independence. In Kurdistan, the part we're talking about is in northern Iraq, the Iraqi government is not happy about the Kurds having a referendum. But honestly, none of the neighbors of Iraq are happy about it, and the United States is not happy about it. So two different referendums in the same week that are causing a ripple effect of concern across their regions and the planet. Now, here are the details. The Kurdish referendum, and for those of you that have taken the class or are in class right now, you know that the Kurds are this group of people. There are about 30 million ethnic Kurds that are scattered across the Middle Eastern region, across multiple sovereign states, mostly in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. These are folks that have never had a state, a distinct nation without a state, okay? And they have said, we're going to have a referendum, and it's happening right this second today, by the way, now, right now, Monday, September 25th, 2017. The vote probably just concluded, and they're going to take about 72 hours to tally up the votes and decide if these people are going to unilaterally declare independence from Iraq. So it is the Kurds in northern Iraq. I keep saying Iraq, northern Iraq, not all of Kurdistan, not all 30 million people that ethnically identify themselves as Kurds across multiple states, just the ones in northern Iraq. And that's about 6 to 8 million folks in northern Iraq that have basically been a semi-autonomous state already for years now. I don't expect you to know this stuff, but back when the United States really hated Saddam Hussein, they established a no-fly zone across northern Iraq specifically to protect the Kurds. This is after the first Gulf War back in the early 90s. So the U.S. Air Force, so the U.S. military in general, has protected Kurdish airspace for a very long time, protected the Kurds against Saddam Hussein, who used mustard gas and chemical weapons against them because he was a really bad dude. So this area, even into the modern era after the second Iraq War, has always kind of been separate. They're separate ethnically because they're Kurds. They're not Arabs, which most of the rest of Iraq is. They're separate historically and culturally, and they actually have their own military. They have their own oil resources, which they have been developing in the last decade. So they are, I will not say a de facto sovereign state, because nobody would recognize that, but they have all the trappings of a sovereign state. They have a government. They have a military force that's pretty significant, quite frankly. They have an economy. They can get by quite well on their own without any help from the Iraqi government. At least that's what they think, okay? So that's the 6 to 8 million people in northern Iraq, in an area I'll just refer to as Kurdistan within northern Iraq, that is voting right this second. There are 30 million ethnic Kurds, again, across multiple states that are going to be impacted by this. The Kurds themselves, but also the sovereign states that they are located within. Most significant are the 15 to 20 million Kurds located in the modern state of Turkey. 15 to 20. And another 8 to 12 million Kurds located in the modern state of Iran. So here's what I want you to understand right from the get-go. We're not talking about all 30 million, and we're not even talking about the biggest populations of Kurds in any state. Iraq only has 6 to 8 million, but they're the ones who are best situated to vote to become an independent state, and they may pull it off. The other populations, specifically the one in Turkey, no, they are not in a position to declare independence from Turkey. Turkey would body slam them fairly quickly, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll come back to that. So 6 to 8 million in northern Iraq going to try to form a separate state. At least that's what they're voting. They're going to see, should we vote to do this and go ahead and unilaterally declare this. So the vote's already taken place. Projections say about 76, 77, 78% voter turnout. That's very high. And almost all polls indicate that, yes, this 76, 77, or 78% of people are going to vote to go ahead and secede from Iraq and become their own independent sovereign state. That's going to significantly upset everyone in the Middle Eastern hood, but we'll come back to that in the second half of this podcast. Let's start actually with the easier one, and that's the independence referendum vote that's going to happen in Catalonia. Now, it's probably going to get more press than the Kurdish one because it's in Europe, and it's a really big deal, especially for Spain, because it's essentially a secessionist movement. But this is the one that actually is just as important, if not more important, than the Kurdish situation. So we'll tackle it first, and it's actually simpler to explain. Catalonia is in northeastern Spain. It's the northeasternmost state of Spain, and consider what I'm saying like a sub-state of Spain. Much there are 50 states in the United States of America, so consider Catalonia like a Texas or a California. They're a part of a bigger sovereign state whole. However, Catalonia happens to be populated by a majority of Catalan people. And these are folks that have their own distinct language and their own distinct culture and their own distinct history, one that they are very proud of and have maintained for centuries. Now, as an outsider, I can tell you from firsthand experience. I partied there, and by the way, if you've ever partied in Spain or been to Barcelona, Barcelona is in Catalonia. It's one of the biggest cities of Spain. Catalonia itself is one of the richest regions of Spain. They pay some of the highest taxes that go to the Spanish government, which is part of the contention here. So it's a rich, important currently part of Spain that has its own distinct history, okay? And that's why these folks are saying, hey, we're not Spanish. Let me go back. When I was saying I visited and partied in Barcelona a lot, I don't know the difference between Catalan culture and Spanish culture. I just have to be honest. And I have Catalan friends, and they told me, well, this is different and that's different, and our language is different, but I don't speak either language, so I can't tell the difference. You as an outsider would probably never be able to tell the difference unless you studied Spanish, okay? So the differences to outsiders are so subtle as to be imperceptible to us, but they're very passionate about it in Catalonia and perhaps just as passionate about it in Spain in general. So what's going on with their referendum? They're saying, in essence, hey, we're the richest state of Spain. The Spanish government as a whole for the last decade has been in dire straits. Spain has not been doing well economically. Spain has some of the highest unemployment rates in all of the EU. It's a state that's been going broke. It's a state that's had to enact austerity measures as imposed by the European Union over the last 5 or 6 years because they're in such a financial state of disaster. And so they've been a struggling state. And now we get to Catalonia, who say, speaking as a Catalonian person, the Catalonians would say, hey, dudes, we're the richest state in this entity called Spain. We're paying the most amount of taxes, and we're seeing the least amount of return. In other words, we are paying the most to keep the Spanish government propped up, and all of our dollars are being redistributed to the rest of Spain, and it's not helping us. And we're our own ethnicity with our own language and our own history that's being denied our independent status on top of all the financial considerations. So that's why this situation has kind of snowballed. And over the course of the last decade, or maybe even longer, there has been a secessionist independence movement within the Catalonian government. Again, the kind of considered a state government. There has been a independence party that said we want to petition to become independent, and they have actually had referendums in the past to vote to become independent. They've always been narrowly defeated. But given the sad state of economic affairs in Spain, this movement has gained steam in the previous years, and now they've said we're going to hold a referendum for independence Sunday, October 1st, 2017. That's this coming Sunday. So the Kurds just did it today, and the Catalans are doing it in less than a week. This is really kind of bizarre. They're unrelated, but it's the same principle. We, a distinct group of people, want to separate from the sovereign state we're in because they're not doing enough for us, and maybe we don't like them in general, and we think we can do better by ourselves. That's the essence of it. Now, what does Spain say about this independence referendum? Well, unlike the Kurdish one, which, you know, the Kurds are located in Iraq. Iraq's been in a kind of chaotic, almost civil war state for a decade. They're fighting ISIS. They've been invaded multiple times. They have multiple militaries in there, including the United States. No one has sanctioned the Kurdish one, but everybody just said, hey, Kurds, don't do that. Can you guys not do that vote? The Spanish government response to the Catalan vote has been overwhelmingly more proactive. And what I mean by that is the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, has repeatedly said that this referendum is a unilateral referendum on part of Catalonia and will not be allowed to take place because it's a breach of the Constitution of Spain. The Spanish Supreme Court has said this is illegal. You can't do it. The Spanish central government has already, in the past week, arrested 14 Catalan officials, seized 10 million ballot papers. The Spanish government, in essence, is coming into Catalonia and grabbing the ballots and trying to shut down this vote from actually happening and arresting mayors and other Catalan officials that may be pro-independence or even just pro-independent referendum. The Spanish Attorney General has refused to rule out the possibility of actually arresting the Catalan president if they go forward with this vote in less than a week. So this is a very big deal, and this is a very hot topic, and this is going to cause conflict. It already is causing conflict within Spain. Now, again, it's going to cause conflict in Kurdistan because people are not, the neighbors and maybe the Iraq government are not happy about it. It's going to cause future chaos and perhaps action in Kurdistan. It's already causing chaos and consternation within Spain, and this is particularly resonant because we think of Spain as a developed country, as a rich country, as an established democracy, as a part of the EU. So to have this sort of, again, almost chaos occurring there is troubling. You're like, wait a minute, this is one of the countries where everything's okay. The Middle East has lots of conflict. We're used to conflict there. We're not used to conflict in the European Union, not within a sovereign state. Now, this puts Spain in an exceptionally tough position. And I do want you to kind of be empathetic to both sides of the argument here. The Catalans say, hey, we basically have taxation without representation. We're our own nation. We would like to have our own independence. And in a democracy, shouldn't the people be allowed to do what they want to do? Right? So this puts the Spanish government in a pinch because they want to hold their state together, obviously, but they don't want to be seen as fascist dictatorship to forcibly hold it together. And what I mean by this is Spain is a sovereign state. All the rest of the states on planet Earth recognize Spanish sovereignty. Well, you know what sovereignty is now. So that means the whole world recognizes that Spain has the absolute right to control its citizens. And no one else can interfere. They have that right as part of the sovereign state club. Spain does not want to lose part of its state. It doesn't want to have a civil war on its hands. It doesn't want to have a secession going on. And as we've already pointed out, Catalonia is a huge tax base. They don't want to lose the revenue. So the Spanish government says rightfully, legally, hey, you're part of our country, and all the rest of the world recognizes that we are the sovereign rulers of this country, so you guys cannot do this. You just can't do it. You cannot declare independence. You can't. You're part of our state. They have that right, and they're expressing that right. However, Spain is a democracy. Spain, has the freedom of speech and human rights, and part of that might be the human rights of groups of people to control their own destiny, in a sense, through peaceful means, through the ballot box. So if you think about it, it's like, oh, wow, Spain is part of the club that also looks at this thing we call self-determination. And self-determination, as part of the hallmark of Western democracy, is that we, the Western states, Team West, and actually it's a principle at the United Nations, we, the people of Earth, have all said, hey, a people based on respect for the principle of equal rights and fair equality of opportunity have the right to freely choose their sovereignty and their international political status with no interference from outsiders. This is a foundation stone of the United Nations. It's a foundation stone of U.S. foreign policy. It's a foundation stone of Europe, the European Union, and all of its former colonies since World War II. Again, this is stuff that maybe you would learn in history class, but if you didn't, I can catch you up real quick. The world used to be run by empires, and empires said, we're powerful, we're going to go take over parts of the planet. We're going to take over India, we're going to take over Southeast Asia, we're just going to take it. After World War II, the right of self-determination became the standard that everybody started to play by. And so the U.S. and Western Europeans and others said, hey, Britain, you guys cannot claim that you own and control 1 billion people in India. That's preposterous. They're not your people. They're their own people. They should have the right to self-determination to rule themselves. And since World War II, that's become the standard. Everybody's like, yeah, you're right. That's why all of the Asian states that were under colonial domination became independent. That's why all the African states became independent. Everybody said, no, we're not doing that anymore. People should have the right to choose their path. We all agree on it, right? So what do you do if you're Spain now? Well, crap. Spain's a democracy. They believe in voting and human rights and self-determination, a foundation stone of Western democracy in general. But they want to hold their state together. So how are they going to do this? What do you do when part of your people in a democracy vote to not be part of your democracy? Are you going to crush it with force? You can, and Spain has promised they're going to. But do you want to be seen as the country doing that? I mean, Spain in particular, this is really sensitive for you folks that don't know Spanish history. Spain used to be a dictatorship for a very large part of the 20th century under this dude, Francisco Franco. Full-on dictator, fascist, kind of like Hitler and Mussolini, but like Mussolini light, but really held the country together with an iron fist. And it's not something that the Spanish people are that proud of or that they're hankering back to do. Nobody wants that, but how else is Spain going to hold its democracy together if they don't do it by force? So this, again, gets to be the rub. What does Spain do? Come out hard and say, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to shut it down by force, which makes them look kind of dictatorship-y, or allow a secession movement to happen. Just so you know the sideline here, the Spanish government is also troubled because if they allow this independence movement to happen, if they say, okay, you're right, Catalan, you guys can become an independent Catalonia, there's also another distinct group of people in Spain called the Basque. The Basque folks in northern Spain have for decades said that they wanted to be their own state too. And they actually gave up aspirations of that not that long ago. So Spain, if they go the nice route and allow Catalan to go away, then the next group is the Basque. And the Basque are going to say, you just let the Catalonians do it, then we're out too. And now you start to have a state that's unraveling. Now where that leads, I don't know, but I don't think the Spanish government wants to find out. Also consider that how this vote goes and how the Spanish government deals with it is going to play a large role in Scotland perhaps declaring independence in the very near future, declaring independence from Great Britain. And it's going to possibly affect other nations, national groups across Europe who perhaps also have aspirations for self-rule. And because the Europeans are the ones that kind of started the whole trend of nation states and sovereign states in the modern world. What happens in Europe sets the standard for what then happens in the world. So if these small groups, pro-nationalist, independence groups within current sovereign states start to tear away, that sets a trend that, oh, well, that might happen in other parts of the world too. Lots of other parts of the world that have nations of people within them who perhaps want to be separate from the sovereign state that they're currently contained in. But now let's shift to the Kurds, a way more lethal and deadly situation that's going to get way hotter and way bloodier over a longer term. The Spanish one's going to happen now. The Kurdish one is going to have repercussions for years to decades. This one is more volatile, with the promise of real civil strife and perhaps open conflict between multiple sovereign states within this region, almost all of which have vowed openly or discreetly to make sure that the Kurds never, ever, ever get an independent state of any way, shape, or form ever. It really does almost threaten the very existence of some current states that we recognize. Now, who in particular are we talking about that wants to put the kibosh on this Kurdish referendum? Well, as I pointed out, there's 6 to 8 million people in northern Iraq who are voting on this independent status are wanting to tear themselves away from Iraq. Now, Iraq has been a place in constant turmoil for decades that many of us, myself included, have said, you know, Iraq is kind of a civil war. It's hard to call it anything else. You have distinct groups of people who are vying for power within the state. Some of them are Arab ethnically, some of them are Kurdish ethnically who don't want to be a part of the same state. Some of them are religiously Sunni, some of them are religiously Shia. The Shias have affiliation with Iran, the Sunnis have affiliation with Saudi Arabia. So there's multiple levels of the Iraqi state that have been tearing it apart. Centripetal forces is what we call it, a pulling apart. And it's barely a state in any way, shape, or form, and probably wouldn't be without the assistance of the U.S. military and world governing powers trying to hold it together. So this Kurdish referendum is, of course, the biggest threat immediately to the sovereign state of Iraq, who's going to lose a big chunk of its country, and a chunk of its country that's sitting on really big oil reserves. So Iraq, first and foremost, has said, no, this vote's illegal. You guys can't do this. Please don't do this. In fact, they've been really nice. They haven't threatened to come storming in with the military and shut it down like the Spanish government. They've just been saying, please don't do this. Haven't we had enough trouble? Can't we all just get along for a little bit longer and try to hold Iraq together? Come on, Kurds. We've given you a lot of autonomy. You really kind of control your own affairs. Do you really have to take this step and become completely separate, independent, sovereign status? Because it's not going to happen, and it's just going to cause more chaos within Iraq. So Iraq does not want to have anything to do with it. Next door in Iran, they're not really keen on this either. Remember, they've got 8 to 12 million Kurds in sovereign state Iran. So their fear is, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't want them carving out a section of Iraq because that might then incite the Kurds in Iran to try to do the same thing. The same thing has actually been attempted in the past in Iran. Just after World War II, by the way, every single major war that's happened in the Middle East, the Kurds have attempted to become independent during or just after it. So this isn't even anything that new. So just after World War II, the Kurds in Iran said, hey, we're sick of this. We don't like being in this area. We don't like this leadership that we're under. We're our own ethnic group, so we want to declare independence. And they pulled it off for about a year in 1946. It was the Republic of so-and-so. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't that long lasted. But then the Iranian government under the Shah consolidated power, came in and smashed that movement and said, nope, you're part of Iran. Just sit down and shut up. That's largely been the status of the Iranian Kurds ever since. So that's why Iran in today's world right now is saying, we don't have anything against the Kurds specifically, but we do not want this independent state popping up next door. We don't want the Kurds in our state getting any ideas. And that leads directly into and can be duplicated next door in Turkey. Now, Turkey is the biggest opponent of all of this. You might think that Iraq would be the biggest opponent of this Kurdish independence referendum. And you'd be wrong. Turkey is adamant about no, stop, no, stop it. Not going to happen. Don't do it. Why is Turkey so against a group of Kurds in another country? In another country declaring independence. Why would Turkey care? Some of the same reasons I just pointed out with Iran. Turkey has the biggest population of Kurds. What I say, 15 to 20 million? And this is a really broad numbers I'm giving. 8 to 12 million in Iran, 15 to 20 in Iraq. Why can't I give you exact numbers? Because it's a nation of people that's never had a state, and they live up in the mountains trying to escape persecution of all these countries. We really don't know how many there are. There could be 30 million of them or 40 million of them. We don't know. So that's why we're ballparking figures. Even given the ballpark figures, Turkey has the biggest population of Kurds concentrated in southeastern Turkey. It's a large group of people. Think about that, 15 to 20 million people. That's a lot of folks. That's a lot. That's more folks than a lot of sovereign states have in population total. So it's a very big group of people who are not Turkish, ethnically not Turkish, and perhaps have always wanted to become their own sovereign state, which they have for 100 years, at least many of them, and now may have the chance once again to try to do it. So Turkey has been on again, off again, fighting a war against Kurdish separatists within Turkey themselves. A group called the PKK, which is a designated terrorist organization by Turkey, designated as terrorist by the EU, designated as terrorist by the United States. And the PKK is a Kurdish workers' party that has been advocating independence for decades. And Turkey has been waging a war against them for decades. It got kind of quiet a decade or so ago, but now it's revamped again as the Kurds are gaining more power in northern Iraq and perhaps inciting pro-independence movement within Turkey themselves. So Turkey is absolutely mortified by this referendum that's happening, not even in their own country, but next door in Iraq. They have gone so far as to threaten to close airport services between Turkey and Kurdistan to actually stop the flow of oil from Kurdistan to Turkey. Most oil that is the biggest GDP generator, the biggest money revenue generator for Kurdistan, is an oil pipeline that runs from Kurdistan in northern Iraq to Turkey. And the Turkish president has alluded in the last 24 hours, well, you guys have this referendum to declare independence. Guess what? We're going to cut off the valve and you guys will be broke. So they are very serious about trying to stop this referendum and certainly trying to stop any independence movement that may come about after this referendum. I should also note that Turkey has multiple times invaded northern Iraq and bombed positions held by the PKK. So Turkey already has had active military offenses against Kurdish folks, both in Iraq, and actually they've attacked Kurdish folks in Syria as well. So for Turkey, it's a really gigantic big deal to make sure that everyone knows they're not happy about this going down. Now, let's back it up. I guess I should add, by the way, the United States is not happy about this either. The United States being the biggest, I'll say, sponsor of the present state of Iraq, trying to hold Iraq together after the U.S. has had military occupations there, 2 different ones in the last few decades. So the U.S. has been kind of saying, hey, you guys should be a democracy. Okay, they're trying to do that. And the U.S. is saying, hey, hold this together. You're a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state. It's cool. Just hold it together. So the Kurds trying to tease themselves away from this Iraqi union troubles the United States as well. And the United States is begging them, please do not declare independence. Come on. You guys have autonomy. The Iraqi government's helping you. Let's work out a deal. Don't take that step because it pisses everybody else off. And now everything we've worked so hard to try to hold together is going to fall apart. Fair assessment on their part. So the question then becomes, why would the Kurds be doing this anyway? If every single entity around them, including the United States, is saying, please don't do this, why are the Kurds going to do it? Would you? If you are a nation of people without a state for 100 or 200 or 500 years, and every time you've tried to create a state, you've pretty much gotten slapped down anyway, why would you keep trying? And why would you try right now? Well, the Kurds would say, well, there's no better time than the present. Everybody's always hated the idea of us becoming an independent state. Why is it now any different? It's not. So everybody hates us. Okay, whatever. Everyone has always wanted them to fail, so why would declaring independence this time be any different, or why should we care that everybody wants us to fail? They always want us to fail. They're always going to want us to fail. So there's no better time than the present, and that's mostly because the present is different. Here's what I want you to understand and remember. What's different about the Kurds now? The Kurds have been one of the most successful military forces fighting against ISIS. That's right, you've heard of them. That crazy-ass, insane clown posse called ISIS that's been taking over parts of Iraq and Syria. And so they're such extreme wacko religious fanatics that the whole world's like, whoa, ISIS is terrible, they're horrible, somebody should go defeat them. The Kurds have actually been doing the most to defeat ISIS. They have had boots on the ground with guns in hand, actively taking back ground from ISIS. More so than any other military entity in this region. So you have a military force that is what we call seasoned. They're actually fighting. They're battle-hardened. They've been defending their territory from these wacko fundamentalist extremists and doing it successfully. Never underestimate a battle-hardened, seasoned military. It's way better than an inexperienced military that may have superior forces. These guys have been fighting and defending their land. They know their territory. They know their geography. They've been successful at doing it. They have confidence they can defend themselves from any interlopers if they declare independence. And that's important. Remember, one of the key ways you can prove independence and true sovereignty even 1,000 years ago is being able to defend your territory from people who try to make sure that you don't have sovereignty. So declaring a sovereign state right now is, to me, very predictable, because the Kurds can look at the whole situation and say, we have never been yet in such a powerful position of proving ourselves and being able to prove our sovereignty by force if necessary. If you can, by force, prove sovereignty, that is, defend your territory and push out all attackers, you don't need approval by the United Nations, do you? If the Kurds can defend northern Iraq from the Iraqi army, they don't need recognition by the Iraq government. If they can forcibly do it, they don't need anybody's recognition at all. They're just going to do it. And I think, this is speculation, but I believe that's part of why they're saying, we can actually do this right now. We have now for years successfully defended our territory in northern Iraq. We have for years already ran our own government. We've already been running our own affair. We have an economic resource of oil. We can afford to run ourselves, and we have been running ourselves, and we are an independent nation, and we should be a nation state. There you go. Sorry for the long, drawn-out, exceptionally emotional plea about what's happening with these independence referendums in a couple different parts of planet Earth, but please, please, please understand that in my mind, these issues happening in very current events are way more important than, any Trump tweet storm or the showdown between the U.S. and North Korea. These, politicians bickering, even at the highest levels of current events, do not have the long-term impact that these particular independence referendums do. Well, why would that be? Because now we're talking about the human experience over time, and we're now debating about self-determination. That is a principle that will be applied to and will affect how other people behave on the planet for decades to come. Is self-determination done? This kind of foundation stone or plank of the platform of Western democracy, are we giving up on it? Is this a new era for the future of how nations or peoples may or may not try to achieve their own state and try to achieve their own self-rule or sovereignty? What happens in Catalonia and possibly Kurdistan could be a game changer for Scotland, for Tibet, for Taiwan, for indigenous groups all over planet Earth who may have aspirations for self-rule. Even ones you've never even heard about. There are tons of different nations of people in Asia and Africa who have in times past wanted to be independent sovereign and may in the future want to be independent sovereign. I would pick on one in particular. Look up the Republic of Biafra in Nigeria. This is a coalition of different ethnic groups who have said, we don't want to be part of Nigeria. And they have battled the Nigerian government multiple times in significantly bloody wars in the last 50 years. And you've never even heard of it, right? And so the people of Biafra are probably watching what's going on in Catalonia and Kurdistan saying, okay. So it's kind of a big deal. The Catalan referendum specifically may further strain the coherence of the European Union itself. Think about this. Will other countries of the EU recognize Catalonia if they declare self-independence? Will they not recognize Catalonia? What will Spain do if, say, the UK and Germany and France recognize Catalonia? Will that piss off Spain so much they pull out of the European Union altogether? These are big ticket items. These are affecting big international organizations and shaping the planet in very big ways. With the Kurds, to finish off in that realm, even more huge change to the impact of the entire Middle East. If these guys declare independence, it's going to affect the foreign policy of all the neighboring states. It will very likely trigger a military reaction by Turkey, and I would actually suggest within the next month or two. So on top of the Syrian civil war occurring, you're now going to have perhaps a civil war in Iraq and Turkey intervening into other sovereign states to stop the Kurds. This turns into a really big mess for all of the states of the Middle East, but also United States, Russia, and other world powers that have their fingers in this pie as well. So in closure here, just a couple of small groups of people, okay? Well, 30 million Kurds, that's a lot, but it's small groups of people currently in sovereign states, perhaps wanting independence in their little corners of the planet, but the outcomes of these referendums will have big ramifications for the countries that they're currently in, for the regions as a whole, and for the entire world. And that, my friends, is why the Kurds and the Catalans causing chaos was the subject of our podcast today. But for now, party on.